What you're about to see is a video I made several years ago before my house was flooded back in like 2019. And it is looking at the symbolism and the connection between all the different icons that appear during Holy Week and how there's a beautiful and very powerful relationship between the different symbolisms that we find in those icons. So please enjoy.
This is Jonathan Pageau. Welcome to the Symbolic World.
And so during Holy Week in the Orthodox tradition, there are a series of icons which appear. And what's interesting about these icons is, of course, they take us down the story of Holy Week towards the crucifixion and the resurrection. But they also exemplify something that I've been telling you about for quite a while now, which is the interrelated aspect of symbolism, how symbolism is really a pattern. And so because it is a pattern, there are resonances which appear. You could say it this way, that the icons talk to each other. They call upon each other, and what that does is it creates a symphonic effect, a symphony of imagery, which all, cross over into each other and create this interconnected web of meanings. And so when we look at the icons of Holy Week, we can see that happen quite beautifully. And it can also help us to understand certain elements of certain icons, not by analyzing the icons on their own, looking at what's in the icon, but at looking at how those icons relate to other icons in the same cycle, into the cycle of Holy Week. And it can help us to see why certain details are sometimes put into those images. And so as we start, of course, Holy Week, we should start at the entry into Jerusalem, Palm Sunday. That icon represents Christ entering into Jerusalem as a kingly figure, sitting on an ass or a colt and coming into the city as young children cut palms up in the trees, and people take off their vestments and put them at the feet of Christ as Christ is entering onto his ass. And as we look at this image, what it does is it also opens up this vision that we have in the cycle of Holy Week, which is a vision of extremes, and it opens up this vision of extremes. The vision of extremes is to help us see the profound paradox, but also the intuitively right aspect of Christ as being both the highest, joining with the lowest. And so being the incarnate logos, the manifestation of the source, the origin of all the world, and then bringing that logos down to the bottom of the world and showing how it connects, how it even unites with the lowest of the low. And so that is what we see in Holy Week, especially during a certain service. I forget what it's called in English, but there's a service towards the end of Holy Week, which is a service of complaints, a service of mourning, where that is what we cite. In this service of mourning, in this service of lamentation, we get sentences which compare the extremes. For example, the one which I find the most touching is as Christ is being put down into the grave, we hear, "Oh, strange wonder, new to man, he who granted me the breath of life is carried lifeless in Joseph's hands to burial." Another example, "He who holds the earth in the hollow of his hand is held fast by the earth, put to death according to the flesh. He delivers the dead from the grasping hand of hell." And so it is this raising up and then bringing down and showing how both of those at the same time, this total reality of the highest joining with the lowest is what frees us from the curse of the lowest, is what frees us from the curse of death. Another example, "He appears now as a corpse without form or comeliness, he who has made beautiful the nature of all things." And so here is this extreme. So as we start the the procession of Holy Week, as we start the story of Holy Week, we start with the high. And so here comes Christ into Jerusalem, and everybody is acclaiming him as the new king. And he's entering into what seems to be a honorable place. An interesting aspect of the icon of the entry into Jerusalem is that a later tradition, somewhere around the 14th century, we think, a detail was added to some of those icons, which held and it was perpetuated. And in this detail, what we see is a two young children. Of course, these children that are taking the palms out of the trees, two young children sitting on the ground in the foreground, and one of them has a thorn in their foot. And the other child is trying to help that one to remove the thorn from their foot. And so you would think, why would such a detail be added to an image of the entry into Jerusalem? Seems like a very strange thing to add. And the reason seems to be related to this pattern of icons, because the very next icon that we will see in the story of Holy Week is an icon called the Bridegroom. The icon of the Bridegroom is, of course, in the Latin tradition called ecce homo, here is the man, and we see Christ as a king. He has a reed, he's holding his staff, he's wearing a purple vestment, and he also is wearing a crown. But of course, this crown is the crown of thorns. And in this image, once again, we have the joining of the two extremes. An exalted imagery of a king, which is then taken down to the lowest of a man who is being tortured and mocked. And so they are mocking him as the king. It's a mirror image of the day of the icon we saw just the day before, which is the praising of him as the king. And so now they're mocking him as a false king or as an imaginary king, and they're torturing him and putting on his head the crown of thorns. Now, of course, I've talked about this before. The crown of thorns is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful symbols of Christianity, because it is taking the curse of death, the curse that God put on Adam and Eve. One of those curses was that the world was going to produce thorns. The thorns are the hostility of the world. They are also an image of death itself, because they are these pointy protrusions of the plant to protect themselves from a hostile world. But they're like nails or horns of an animal. They're dead themselves. They're not living things. They're like weapons to protect ourselves from death. I've talked about this quite a few times before, this notion of a layer of death to protect us from death. And so now Christ takes this layer of thorns, this curse of the fall, and flips it over and brings it up into a glory. And that, of course, is the crown of thorns. Now, that can help you to understand why, as we see Christ entering into Jerusalem, we already see these two children who are at the bottom of the icon trying to deal with the thorns, because it's to show us that this is all part of the same pattern. This high cannot exist without this low. It's already to show the high and the low together, even in the very icon. In the next icon, we show the lowness, but we also hint at the highness by the image of the crown. And the icon is called the Bridegroom. And you would think, once again, how very strange that an icon of Christ, tortured, this ecce homo image, would be called the Bridegroom. And it's because the very next thing we celebrate, that we commemorate in Holy Week, is the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. In the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, there are wise virgins who are ready to receive the bridegroom, and foolish virgins who are not ready to receive the bridegroom. And the foolish virgins are cut out, whereas the wise virgins are held inside the house to receive the bridegroom who is coming for the wedding feast. And so it is already, in a certain manner, an image of the Last Judgment, but also an image of us preparing ourselves for our groom, preparing ourselves as the church, preparing our souls to receive the divine logos, to receive our divine groom in the figure of Christ. But who is this divine groom? We saw it. It is this tortured man. And so once again, this notion of the husband, of the feast of the bridegroom, of the high, of the glorious husband who comes to take his bride, to take our soul, to join with our soul in this sexual symbolism is also, the extremes are shown because this bridegroom is manifested as the tortured Christ in the Ecce Homo image, okay? And so you see, like I said, these extremes back and forth, coming in and out in the story of Holy Week. Now, as we move forward, the next image that we celebrate on Holy Wednesday is the icon of the washing of the disciples' feet. Now, in the icon of the washing of the feet, once again, we are playing with all the different elements that we've seen before. In the image of the entry into Jerusalem, Christ comes in triumphant. He's sitting on the ass, and everybody is taking their vestments off and putting them at the feet of Christ as he enters into the town. So Christ comes in, and then we see him on Holy Wednesday in the room with the disciples, and now he is removing his vestment in order to wash the feet of his disciples. And so the contrast is amazing. And in the icon of the washing of the feet, usually in icons we often don't show a lot of extreme emotions. Things are kind of straightened out and sobered up, you could say, so to not fall into sentimentality. But in this icon, there is the pose of St. Peter, which is very remarkable. And it is this pose of confusion to know that here is the same person who is acclaimed as the king of the Jews, as the Messiah, who is now coming down to the bottom and acting as a servant to wash his disciples' feet. So then we move on to the next icon, which is the icon of the mystical supper. Now, here again, we have to understand that this is happening on the same evening as the washing of the feet. And now Christ takes up again his position as the head of the table, as the head of the family, as the one who is giving the food to the disciples, who is giving his body, who is giving his blood. And so he is giving his body and his blood in a manner of authority where he is telling the disciples, here is how it's going to be. I'm giving you my bread and my body for you to commune in, and he's doing it in a position of authority. But of course, we know what's coming. We know that actual giving of the body and blood of Christ will happen on the cross, where Christ will be treated as a criminal, will be treated as the lowest of the low, will be stripped naked and beaten and put on this cross. And so once again, the extremes are being seen in that very scene. And you also have to understand that you can imagine that Christ washes the disciples' feet, and when he washed the disciples' feet, although it is not said explicitly in the text, it is implied that all the apostles were there, and that includes Judas. And so Christ washed Judas's feet, and then during the mystical supper, during that evening, he then tells Judas to go and do what he has to do, and he also does it, in giving him a piece of bread. Or sometimes it's also Judas who reaches and takes a piece of bread. So, but you can see, like I said, the extremes who just repeat themselves over and over. So then, of course, we then come to Holy Thursday. We come to the actual crucifixion of Christ. Holy Thursday in the evening, which is already Holy Friday. That's another complicated issue, but it's fine. You can understand that we've now come to the crucifixion. And so now we see where all of this has led to, where all of this has come to, which is this image, which is the image in which all is accomplished. And it is the image of Christ at the cross. And so in this image of Christ, we see all the extremes coming together. And so once again, the extreme of him being tortured like a criminal on a stripped naked and tortured publicly on this cross. But then, just like when he was beaten, he had on his head the crown of thorns. Now again, we put on his head, or above his head, we put a sign which says, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And in the Orthodox tradition, iconographic traditions, often people will write Jesus Christ, King of Glory, or just the King of Glory. And so this idea to try to make this image into a cosmic image, to make it, to say that, yes, of course, Christ is the King of the Jews, but what's happening here at the crucifixion is a cosmic event. And he is becoming, in this moment of extremes, which are smashing together in one moment, the highest and the lowest coming together in this moment, he is resolving all the opposites, and it is a cosmic event. Of course, the cosmic event is shown not only with Christ on the cross, but it is also shown by images of the sun and the moon, which appear on the icon of the crucifixion. We often see, sometimes they're figurative. Sometimes it's two characters, usually one blue, one red, and they're hiding themselves from the event. Sometimes they're more abstract, just shapes of the sun and the moon. And sadly, for people, for some strange, insane reason, have been asking me about this image and thinking that it is UFOs, which are represented in this instance. It is not UFOs. It is the sun and the moon. This is just a universal Christian image, which has been there forever. And so don't give up with the conspiracy theories, okay? And so here we have Christ extending his hands out, and the sun and the moon are there inside. And so as he extends his hands out and contains, let's say, all the opposites, he's also containing all of the cosmos within that moment. He is spreading his hands out to stretch out to the ends of the world, is a way to understand it. And so being stretched out on the cross is a moment of death. It's a moment of torture, but it is also a moment where he's filling up the hierarchy, both the vertical and the horizontal hierarchy, filling it up completely with the divine logos. And that, of course, again, is in this paradox of reality, that we're seeing on the cross. Now, from that moment of the crucifixion, what we start to see is there's a few more icons which come after the crucifixion. And many of those icons are already contained within the image of the crucifixion. So let me explain what I mean. At the bottom of the cross, you see there is a cave, or the earth is splitting. And in that cave, you see a skull. That skull is the skull of Adam. It is the skull of man. It is dead man. It is the man who has been taken by the curse of death. And you see Christ's blood, which is pouring down on his legs on the cross, and which is often, you see it. You don't always see the blood, but in some images you see the blood is pouring down onto the skull of Adam. And so this, of course, has all to do with the fact that Christ, the place where Christ was crucified, is called Golgotha, which is the place of the skull. And then in the tradition, it becomes a strange compression of many things, where the Golgotha, the place of the skull, is recognized in some traditions to be the place of burial where Adam was buried. In other traditions, it comes to be the place of paradise itself, the place of the tree of life. All of this kind of comes together, where the cross becomes the tree of life, but also becomes the place where Adam died. The two extremes smash together. Christ enters into paradise in that moment, but also goes to the end of death at the same time. Those two things are happening at once. And the image of the blood coming onto the skull of Adam is showing us something which is happening in another icon, which is the icon of the resurrection, or the icon of the Anastasis. The icon of the resurrection is actually not an image of the resurrection proper. It is an image of what we call the descent into Hades. And so as Christ descends into death, you see him now entering this cave. It is the very cave that you saw under the cross. And what's happening there under the cross is now shown explicitly what is happening on the cross when Christ is dying. And we see Christ going down into death. And there he goes and he grabs Adam and he grabs Eve. He grabs the first people to show us that it's all of us, right? It's all men who are, in that, let's say in Adam's womb, we could say, the way that the Bible talks about being in the womb of Abraham, not the womb, sorry, the bosom of Abraham. So in the bosom of Adam, we are all contained in the bosom of Adam. And so Christ is pulling out Adam and Eve out of death. And we see in the image the breaking of the doors of hell. You see those doors underneath Christ's feet. You see also, usually there's Hades who's down there in the dark place, who is chained and held. Sometimes it's Hades and the devil as well, and Satan, who are both chained up down at the bottom of hell. And then you also see bits and pieces of iron. And so these bits and pieces of iron are actually, let's say, pieces of the door, that is, pieces of the locks and pieces of the hinges of the door of hell. And you might think, well, that's a very strange kind of random thing to put there. But it's important because what it shows is that this dark space of death is the space, we talk about it, is the space of chaos. It's the space where things stop having meaning. And so So having these bits and pieces of iron that are broken and have are not recognizable anymore, or are barely recognizable, or are broken, or are fragmentary, this is all related to the symbolism of death itself, which is this fragmentation, this breaking apart of meaning, the decomposition. All of that is shown by in the image of showing these bits and pieces of doors and locks and pins that are flying out, from this moment of the resurrection. And so what, like I said, what's important to understand is that this image is already there in the image of the crucifixion. When you look at the image of the crucifixion, what you see down at the bottom of the cross is already the image of the Anastasis. It's as if the image of the Anastasis is inside the crucifixion, and then we're kind of going in and opening it up so that we see what's behind the crucifixion. What's behind the crucifixion is this glorious moment where Christ is pulling Adam and Eve out of death. And so the other image also of Holy Saturday, which is the older image actually of the resurrection, is not, once again, the image of the resurrection. Interestingly enough, in Orthodox iconography, ancient Orthodox iconography, people did not show the actual resurrection because it's not described in the Bible. And so we don't have an image of, Christ coming out of his his grave. What we have is this imagistic image of Christ in death, saving Adam and Eve from Hades. And then we also have this other image, which is the angel who is showing the women who come to the tomb of Christ. He is showing the women the empty tomb. And if you look at the empty tomb, you see a lot of the things that I talked about. First of all, you see this cave, this opening in the ground, which is the same opening that we had in the icon of the Anastasis, and is the same opening that we had in the image of the crucifixion. But it's also another opening. It's also the same opening that we had in the icon of the birth of Christ. If you look at the icon of the birth of Christ, you see Christ lying in a manger, wrapped in swaddling clothes. And the way that we represent the manger is very similar to the manner in which we then represent the tomb of Christ. And now here are these same swaddling clothes. Here is this linen which Christ was wrapped in, and it is empty. And so it connects us, the end to the beginning, and it also shows us that this was the purpose from the start, that the entering of Christ the entering of the Logos into creation was already a dying, you would say. It was already a dying, but at the same time, like I said, a full filling up death with light, filling up death with life. Those two contradictions at the same time. And so as you can see, the images which are chosen for Holy Week, there's also, of course, the image of some of them that I didn't show, which are the taking down of Christ from the cross, and also the burial of Christ, where we see Christ laying down on the tomb. And that image is extremely important as well, because it shows us the relationship as Christ is shown lying down. This is a little more complicated for people to understand, but in iconography and in imagery, to show someone lying down is not random. It is meaningful. To show someone lying down is to show them dead or asleep, because that's when you lie down. And so to have him lying down is also pointing to this mystery where on the cross you saw him up, standing up and filling up the hierarchy, now lying down and coming down into death. It also connects the image of Christ laying down, sleeping, dead, to the image of what's happening at the same time secretly inside. So you see him lying down on the grave, but then in the Anastasis image, you see him standing up glorious. And often he's holding his cross in his hand in the image of the resurrection to say, here's the tool of my torture and my death, and now it has become for me a banner of victory, a weapon of victory. And so he holds his cross in his hands like he would hold a banner, or he would hold a sword or something like that, to show these extremes, this contrast coming together. And so what's important to understand, of course, when I talk about these extremes, is not just the extremes, because Christianity is obviously not a religion of dualism. It's not a religion of duality. It is in a certain manner a religion of duality, but a duality which comes to be united without confusion. And so does not become joining together the opposites does not become a kind of chaotic mush, of nonsense, but rather it is a perfect union of opposites, a perfect union of diversity into unity, which preserves the multiplicity and preserves even the duality. We say that Christ is both perfectly God and perfectly man, united, without mixture and perfect distinction between his two natures. It's so strange that Christians insisted so much on those definitions. And this is really the secret. And you can see it in the story of Holy Week, where it is the fact that those two extremes are there and are brought together without negating the extremes, but that's how the world exists. And this is really the mystery of how the world exists, which is that unity and duality, unity and multiplicity need to coexist and need to exist in a manner which does not dissolve one or the other. And so I hope this little explication of the icons of Holy Week have been helpful. I wish you a fruitful Holy Week, and hopefully we can move beyond, the news and beyond all the things that are pulling us apart. I myself, during this period of Lent, I have found this period of Lent extremely difficult. Feel like I've been on a roller coaster of being pulled apart, and so I ask I ask God that this Holy Week I can find the peace that He brings us at Pascha. And so thanks again, everybody, and I will see you soon. I said I would never do it again, but here we are. We are announcing the Symbolic World Summit in May 2026. I have so many great people around me that I'm just excited to do it, even though I thought it would be crazy to do it again.
Our summit's going to be from May 14th through 16th in Broadview Heights, Ohio. You can buy tickets at symbolicworldsummit.com. Keynote speakers this year are Father Josiah Trenham and Dr. Mary Harrington, which is a combination nobody knew that they wanted, but I think is going to be absolutely incredible. And of course, Jonathan and I will be speaking as well as several people from around the Symbolic World community.
A lot of people that you like, that you've seen, are going to be there, are going to come. We're going to have book signings. It'll be a lot of time for people to meet and to greet. We're also doing Supra as well. And so come and join us. We can't wait for this, and we're excited to meet you in person.